So, something like a month ago, I told you that for me, Holy Week has the best drama of the Christian year. So now, after Palm Sunday, Monday, Thursday, Good Friday, Easter Sunday, and the follow on stories, like the one about doubting Thomas and the story called The Road to Emmaus, I'm ready to coast for a little bit. I figure it's time for a more comforting message today. I hope you're okay with that. So you can imagine how delighted I was to have those readings from the lectionary, and thank you for reading them, Carol. Because our readings are about sheep and shepherds and the good shepherd and just lots of nice fuzzy things, right? Our readings included the very classic 23rd Psalm, The Lord is my shepherd. That psalm is used at virtually all the funerals I perform, which makes me think people must find it comforting. Prepare for a comforting message. But when we read the 23rd Psalm outside of the context of a funeral service, a couple of questions actually might pop up. What I've always found odd about the psalm is that in the first paragraph, the claim is made that God makes the sheep lie down in green pastures. Okay, that's a friendly image. But in the second paragraph, there's a reference to, even though I walk in the darkest valley. Well, hang on a minute. We were just in a green pasture. How did we get to a dark valley? Did we choose to leave a green pasture and stray into a dark, scary place? Did the pasture change into a dark place all by itself? Did we make a bad decision somewhere along the way? What happened? And if we found ourselves in a green pasture, why did we leave it? But perhaps more importantly, I think that today we understand the image of green pasture anyway, because our image of green pasture is probably completely different than the image that the author of the 23rd Psalm had in mind. The traditional Christian way of viewing the psalm, I think, needs a bit of an upgrade. And part of the problem is, here in Canada, we have adopted a very European view of that image. Well, fair enough. In a very European sense of what shepherds, sheep, and green pastures look like. It's very natural, of course, but in this case, I believe it has taken us a long way from the original meaning of green pasture, and therefore also a long way from understanding the meaning of the Good Shepherd. So, for example, here's an image of what we probably tend to think of when we think of green pasture. I mean, it's green, it's a pasture, right? What else do you want? Here's a green pasture with actual sheep on it, and I'm pretty sure it's not AI. And another one, just sample images. It looks truly delightful, right? It looks like a place we might have a picnic. It looks like a comforting place, a place of calm and peace. And here's an artist's rendering of Jesus as the Good Shepherd. It's a very typical image. We have a very white Jesus, which is also a leftover of European thinking, of course. And of course, Jesus is helping a small sheep. And look at the pasture itself in the background. Lots of long, lush grasses, very similar to the photos I just showed. Or how about this one? Again, a very white Jesus is carrying a small sheep, and the sheep looks like a pet. In this image, not only do we have luscious grasses for the sheep, I don't know if you can tell very well, but there's a river off on the right side, providing clean drinking water. This image includes everything the sheep could possibly need: food, water, a shepherd. It's a complete package. It's very comforting, right? The sheep have everything they need at hand. They do not need to change or leave that spot or move around. They do not have to think for themselves. They just have to graze and be content. Everything they need is right there. The sheep can live their whole lives right there. That image and others like it have given us a particular view of the Good Shepherd, and therefore also of God. And perhaps even a particular view of what it means to be one of the sheep. In brief summary, we have Jesus as our shepherd, and so we have what we need for the rest of our lives. We do not need to move or change or disturb the status quo or think for ourselves. If we are faithful to the shepherd, we do not have to make any big effort ourselves, right? This is such a comforting image, even I can't mess it up. But these images are precisely where our European perspective, I think, takes us in a strange direction. Because the phrase green pasture in Palestine means something just a little bit different. So here's a photo of an actual green pasture in Palestine. Most of the year, this is what green pasture looks like. This is what green pasture looks like when the author of the 23rd Psalm wrote, God makes me lie down in green pastures. There was nothing wrong with the photo. I did not, digitally remove all the green. From the distance, a green pasture looks a fair bit like bare soil, to be honest with you. And this is an authentic photo of green pasture in Palestine. This is even a pasture for sheep to graze on. And you can tell that because you see those horizontal tracks. Those tracks are made by the sheep. One observer commented that the tracks are spaced out so the sheep on each track can graze up and down the slope, and the entire pasture will be covered or eaten. But do you see any green? Do you see anything to eat? Here's another image. It shows a shepherd literally leading a flock of sheep. The shepherd is the small figure on the right. I don't know how well you can see that. And you can tell the sheep are actually grazing. Many of them have their heads down because they're eating something. Well, what are they eating? Rocks? It really looks like there's nothing for them to eat. And if you saw this image on a better quality screen, you might notice, though, there's this kind of a little hint of green covering most of the image. What the sheep are actually eating are these green shoots. There's very limited moisture, so these shoots appear sporadically, both spatially and temporally. But they're green, they're edible, they sustain life. This image shows a shepherd on a horse, and from this angle we can see those green shoots are there, but they're in small clumps, spaced out. This is nothing like the vast meadows we normally think of when we think of green pasture. So the European, and therefore the Canadian way to read the 23rd Psalm, is about how everything we need is close at hand as long as we listen to the shepherd. The sheep do not have to make any real effort or change. But the Palestinian and more biblical way to read the 23rd Psalm is about how following the shepherd, yeah, we do get what we need, but we only get what we need right now. We get one bite of food at a time, and then we have to move on, and later we get another bite. But we do not see a secure future all mapped out ahead of us. We get what we need one bite at a time with no apparent security that our long-term needs will be met. And yet, we thrive. And which one of these images resonates with you when you consider the ways in which God has cared for you throughout your life? Do you think faith means that everything is rainbows and unicorns, food aplenty with no real effort or worry or struggle? Or do you think that faith means your life can sometimes be a mess? Life can be a real struggle. We have no guarantees beyond the present moment. And yet, you know that you are cared for. You know that you are not alone. We have each other, and we have a shepherd. Well, many people I know tell me they resonate more with this image, with the idea that right now we have a single bite of food or whatever the thing is that we need. But then we have to move, change, grow, adapt. And then later we will get what we need in that moment. This is more or less what happened in our story from Acts 2, actually. The story is about a community of faith not too long after Jesus had headed to the heavens. The community focused on what the apostles had taught them, and they lived in the moment. They sold their possessions in order to share what they had. And because they shared what they had, their little community grew. I was wondering how people hear that story. I mean, do you think those people were nuts? Do you think those people were nicer than we are? Well, probably not. The community in question was waiting for Jesus to return, and they believed Jesus would return very soon, like later this week soon. Like perhaps it's not even worth putting the kettle on soon. They believed Jesus would return long before they had time to spend all their money anyway. So for them, there was no downside in giving everything away, because very soon they would have no use for money or possessions anyway. They were living in the moment, like a sheep that focuses on a single green shoot in front of them. Unconcerned about any long-term future, unconcerned about the next minute, let alone the next day. The sheep in Palestine and that small community that followed Jesus did not worry about security in the way we understand the term today. Today, we need to think about our security, whether we are trying to get a job or managing our expenses so that our retirement funds do not give out before we ourselves give out. Security, and therefore insecurity, are features of modern living. The imagery of the 23rd Psalm and the image of a small community sharing everything in common are hard to imagine today, and even harder to live into. And perhaps we should not even try, because our need for security is actually real. And perhaps that is the big takeaway from these stories, that we need to recognize the tension in our lives between our very real need for security and our very real need to share with others. I mean, today we cannot share everything we have to the point that we ourselves end up living on the street. That would be crazy. At the same time, we cannot aim for so much personal security that we isolate ourselves from each other and do not share with those in need. So, how do we find the right balance between, on the one hand, giving too much away to the point we are left suffering, and on the other hand, being too selfish and isolating ourselves from the needs of our own neighbors? Believe it or not, I have an answer to that question. 3 answers, really. You won't like any of them. But I would say if your own personal tendency is to give away too much, maybe experiment this week, just this week, with caring a bit more about yourself and your own needs. Self care is a form of love. Do something just for you. If your own personal tendency is to never give anything away, well, experiment this week with being gracious. If you don't like giving money to strangers, well, instead invite that stranger to lunch, and then by the time lunch is over, they won't be a stranger anymore. Reaching out is a form of love. And I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but clearly I'm about to. But from the stories I hear, Chapel in the Basement is like a real life example of experimenting with this very question. They shop collectively, they share games, movies, food, laughter together. They seem to have created their own collective of caring. They seem to be trying to live out the story from Acts. And maybe someday they're going to teach us a thing or two about that. My experience of Thorncliffe Park is a place where we all struggle with security and insecurity. But like the green shoots in Palestinian pastures, we find what we need, and we find it together. For me, the stories in the Bible about sheep and shepherds and the Good Shepherd are all comforting. But all these stories seem to ignore one particular detail. And that's where what all these stories ignore is perhaps where we can truly find comfort today. Because what I think these stories all ignore is the flock, the community. I'm sure the reading in Acts included community, but a very short term community that had no intention of living very long. And that's not where we find ourselves today. So, where is the hope in all this? The hope is in the flock, the collective, or in modern language, the community. The biblical stories we read today focus on sheep as individuals, but what about the gift of our community? What about the flock? And you may or may not know this, but when I speak to people outside this congregation, I refer to you collectively as the flock. That won't surprise you at all, I'm sure. And who is a part of this flock? Well, you all are. If you think you belong, you belong. If you want to belong, you belong. And I appreciate the gift that each of us are to each other as part of the flock. And I have to tell you, I do not resonate personally with the image of this flock on the European vast green pastures, where we already have what we need and we can sit back and feel entitled. Instead, I resonate with the image of the flock of sheep on the Palestinian green pasture. There is enough for everyone if we share. And instead of feeling entitled, we feel actually grateful. We feel grateful for each mouthful that we get, and we feel grateful to be part of the flock. We feel grateful for the presence of each other. We appreciate each other in deep ways. And that is true regardless of whatever baggage you've brought in the door with you today. Whatever wounds you carry with you, it's true. I have to say, that's exactly what drew me to this community in the first place. I've never felt drawn as a minister to large, wealthy congregations full of entitled people. I've been drawn more to fragile communities where there's massive opportunity to connect and appreciate the gift of each other. And thank you for inviting me into this special place. And the flock, does not have some master plan all figured out. We travel from green shoot to green shoot. We live in the moment. We appreciate the present moment. And we do that together, led by the shepherd. That is my image of the flock. The flock lives into the vision expressed in our creed that we are not alone. You are part of the flock. You are not alone. You are not alone. You are not alone. There we go. Amen.